Just wanted to get going, folks, so thank you all for joining me. Now, as we begin in the spirit of reconciliation, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. And as an immigrant myself at 10 years old now, and a proud Australian, I also include my own ancestors from lands far and wide and that. Our time is precious, and I thank you all for being here. I've asked our 4 guests to keep their responses to a maximum of 2 minutes, and I'll be chiming a small bell if we go over. Sounds like that. Now, I'm your host, Philip Bateman. For the past 13 years, I've run Bravo Charlie, specializing in helping companies, individuals, and governments to tell their stories to investors. And so you know where I'm coming from and my bias. I want the balance of power in government to be held by ethical individuals acting on behalf of the national interest with adequate systems of checks and balances and common sense approaches to not turning our one home into a big ball of death, basically. Now, this event is self-funded, and until 3 weeks ago, I hadn't spoken to any of the panelists here. And lastly, Buzzword Bingo. The list is in the words in the chat. When you feel you've heard them all, type in bingo, win a $100 voucher to use as you please. And my mum's in the audience keeping tabs on this, and her decision will be final. So with that said, can I just do a quick whip around and get you guys to introduce yourselves, please? Popcorn, if you like.
Who would you like to start? Philip? Shall I start?
Yes, you spoke first. Popcorn, go for it.
Oh, okay, I spoke first. So I'm Despi O'Connor, and I'm coming from Bunurong Bunurong land today, down in the seat of Flinders. And I'll pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land as well, and the waters that surround it. It's a beautiful place to live. I'm a teacher. I've been teaching since 2010. And I've been a volunteer in my community. So whether it's been in sporting groups or friends of groups, and I help look after a local reserve near me, life-saving as well, kinders and school committees. It's been a pretty busy time for me since we moved here in 2006. So over 15 years now in my local community, and I've built, really strong foundations here. I've also been a councillor and a mayor. And to win that seat, I got over 4,000 first preference votes. So I'm kind of on my way to a space where I could actually win this seat. So that's pretty exciting. I was first-time councillor, mayor, so it was a very busy year, but a year that I was able to really get to know my community. And I think that that's something, that people are looking for right now, especially in Flinders. They want to know that the person that they vote for is going to be someone who listens to them and looks out for them. And we've had a pretty tough time down here in Flinders because of COVID, being in a regional, semi-regional space, but called Metro was a really difficult space to be in over the 2 years. So, yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell, I guess, Philip.
Great. Thank you very much.
Oh, they're shy. Okay, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Nicolette Boele, and I also like to pay my respects to the Darug or the Darramaragal people, which have previously, for tens of thousands of years, been on country where I'm beaming to you from, which is the upper North Shore in Sydney. So I have Zali land to my south, and hopefully Scumpsville to the east, and some very impressive, and Spender is just across the water, if you like, a little bit further down. So I am a responsible investment executive with sustainable business and clean energy experience. And I've worked as an advocate in and around Parliament House for over a decade, advocating for climate action and particularly climate policy around clean energy and emissions trading schemes. I'm from my community, and I had to endure a very grueling process to go through the Voices of Bradfield selection process that went over for many, many months. Firstly, because I wasn't really sure I wanted to go back to Parliament, knowing how it works and how toxic and how in some ways misogynistic and bullying that it can be. Now, it was several decades ago. I was there in my early 20s and late 20s, early 30s. But from what I'm seeing from the outside now, not that much has changed. But I couldn't walk past it any longer. And I was the person in the community probably best equipped in our team of a few hundred people to do the job. So I'm standing up to do what I can for the federal seat of Bradfield. And it's a super, super conservative seat. There's STEP's current member is the Minister for Communications, the Arts, Cities and Urban Infrastructure. And it has been held since 1949 by 5 Liberal Anglo-Saxon men. So I'm ready to quite ably mop up the dissatisfaction that our electorate has since the current government's moved very far away from the modern Liberal values that are in this electorate.
Me next. My name is Monique Ryan. I'm the independent candidate for the seat of Kooyong in Melbourne. So I'm speaking to you from the Wurundjeri land of the people of the Kulin Nation. This is a beautiful part of Melbourne, a green and leafy suburb which has, I can beat you, Nicolette, for 121 years been held by white conservative male politicians. I'm a paediatric neurologist by trade. I, until recently, had fairly senior positions at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, but also the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. And so I'm a doctor with no previous engagement with politics other than a transitory membership of the Labor Party some 15 years ago, which has come home to roost in the last few months. But I've been driven to stand for Parliament due to frustrations about issues like climate change, gender equity, the lack of integrity and transparency in our government. And there is a real grassroots thirst for change in Kooyong, even though it has been traditionally a very liberal, very conservative electorate. There's a real frustration with the government, I think with all aspects of its function over the last 3 years, but there's a growing dissatisfaction with its refusal to engage with action on climate change, its attitude to women, and its clear lack of transparency and integrity in much that it does. There's also, I have to say, local frustration with our local member, who is the Federal Treasurer, with not just his performance around the COVID pandemic, but also his what we perceive as his lack of support for this electorate during that period. And so I was selected by a number of independent groups at the end of last year and have been in this role for a couple of months now.
Thank you very much. That brings us to Julianne.
Hi, I'm Julianne Schultz, and I'm not a candidate, although I'm full of admiration for the women who are here in this group today, and others who are standing all around the country. I'm based on Bundjalung country up near the Byron Bay area, which is of course devastated by the floods over the last couple of weeks. I mean, the scenes of devastation have just been truly shocking. Is my mic working? Have just been truly shocking. I mean, I'm sure you've been reading about it, but to just see that devastation occurring with such speed and with such enormity in an area where there's already a great deal of inequality and disadvantage, so that the people, the thousands of homes have been lost, I mean that there are many, many thousands of people who are added to the list of the hundreds of people who are already homeless in this very beautiful part of Australia. I'm here because over the last couple of years I've been working on a book which has just been published, which is called The Idea of Australia, A Search for the Soul of the Nation. And in it I've been trying to understand why we are where we are, which is a position where I think that very many people feel very dissatisfied that in a sense the country seems to have lost its way. And it's partly political and it's partly for reasons of deep history that's sort of unreconciled in this country. And so it was really, at one level, it was a personal journey to try and explain what's happened. and to imagine how it might be possible to turn it around to be a country that's outward looking, engaged, positive, inclusive, you know, many of the good old attributes that I think many of us feel have been lost in the last couple of decades.
Thank you so much, Julianne, especially for letting us use the name of your book for the title of the event, because I found it quite apt as I was reading the bio and the different questions you were posing. And just to get a few little political things out of the way, even though this is a relatively political evening per se, for any of the independents, who or what is Climate 200?
I can go first, if you like.
Please, and you don't all need to respond. Let's just get in there, you know?
Climate 200 is an organisation who registered with ASIC, who has in its constitution an objective to support candidates who share the values and platform that they have. And I understand from what I've read in the media that they have around $7 million that they're allocating to different independents and candidates that do align with the objectives that they have. And personally to our campaign, we've taken some financial assistance from them. And I know exactly how much money members in the postcodes in my electorate have contributed to Climate 200. So I'm very happy to take that money back and reinvest it here. Because I have to say, I put a cap on my donations acceptance, not how much money I'd receive from individuals, but that I would declare, I would disclose the names of people who give me more than $1,500. And the Australian Electoral Commission has a $14,500. I thought this would be lining up with that integrity piece, which it is. It's a balance between taking money in terms of avoiding that capture image, but also, you know, the 96-year-old who was at my launch that gave me 2 gold coins. I'm not filling out papers to disclose that one. So I'm a big fan of what Climate 200 is trying to do. It is not a level playing field for independents. It's a very uphill piece when you have to run against Clive Palmer, who's dropping in tens of millions of dollars on social media paid ads. So that's who Climate 200 is for our campaign here in Bradfield.
I'd say that's fairly echoed. Monique, did you want to?
Oh, look, I think I probably just would agree with Nicolette that there is a perception of Climate 200 which is at odds with the reality, and the major parties are trying to make out that this is some sort of eminence grise behind the various independent candidates, and that Climate 200 has its own agenda and will be pulling our strings to some extent, which is very far from the truth, although it's probably a convenient narrative, particularly for the Liberal Party to engage with. But as Nicolette said, the most important thing to know is that Climate 200 has hundreds and hundreds of donors who are committed to action on climate change and who donate to that organisation knowing and expecting that those donations will be distributed to candidates in electorates where there's thought to be a reasonable chance of victory and where there's demonstrable grassroots support for the independent candidate. And so what we are in many cases, and mine is that my electorate's the same, Coorong's the 5th highest donating electorate to Climate 200. Really what we're receiving back from Climate 200 is money which would otherwise probably come straight to us.
And my understanding is it's a dollar for dollar matched, in a sense that you need to generate that income from your local electorate first. They're not just backing horses per se. Is that the case?
I think that's an individual agreement. There's individual agreements between different electorates. It wouldn't be a standard agreement.
Great.
That's not the case in our electorate. It was...
I'll strike that from the record. I'm
really, no.
Can I add something, Philip? I just wanted to, I guess, add that Climate 200 aren't just backing voices of candidates. You know, the Voices movement is fantastic and it stretches right across Australia. And the Voices movement really is about engaging people in that conversation around democracy, which is so incredible. And in fact, that whole movement has lifted many of us to stand regardless of whether we're part of a Voices group or not. And Climate 200 are supporting me as well. And I guess, you know, they've they've seen that I'm working hard. I've got the community behind me. So it is about backing the people who they think have got a good chance, and who they, you know, where the money, like Nicolette said, you know, where the money is coming from within those areas, it's where they're hoping to send it back there. And I think that's important.
To come at one other point here, I've seen several mentions from the Liberal Party particularly that the independent movement is only going after Liberal seats, and potentially it's therefore just a front for Labor and the Greens. So what's that about?
I usually go first, so Monique, come on.
Well, I think if you look at the women, or it's mainly women standing, most of us would be intolerant of major party structures, whether that be factional limitations for the ALP or what's very clearly, you know, party-driven polity in the Liberal Party. And so most of us would be very intolerant of that sort of setting. It's a very convenient narrative for the Liberal Party to say this, because they know that they are under significant threat in a number of marginal electorates. But there's no evidence to any of us having, some of us have had different, you know, political allegiances in the past, which does include, of course, some people having, some of the independents having been Liberal Party members in the past. But yeah, there's no substance to that suggestion. And yeah, I think it's a bit sort of specious, really. They're going to keep trotting it out. I'm sure we're going to be hearing it up until election day, but you know, there's no substance to it. There's no proof of it. There's nothing to suggest that that is the case. And I would have no interest in being a member of the Labor Party or the Liberal Party at this point, or the Greens, for all the reasons that we're all stating to people all day, every day.
Great. Thanks. I don't need to sweat that anymore. I just wanted to...
Can I just add something there, which I think is just sort of worth putting in context? And that is, I think that, you know, that Monique's answer is absolutely spot on. I mean, people who are involved in the independence movement may have had political attachments in the past, but they're not naturally big party joiners. That's why they're independents. And I think one of the things that when the Liberal Party officials make these claims, the thing that they're sort of masking in a sense is that the Liberal Party was for many years a party which included people who were small L liberals. I mean, people who would share many of the views which those who are standing in these seats would share. People who have that view of politics have effectively been marginalised to the extent that they are almost invisible now in the Liberal Party. They've got next to no sway and authority. So it's something which they've brought on themselves, in a sense, that people will be standing in these very safe Liberal Party electorates where people have a much wider view of what it means to be a Liberal conservative than is currently embodied in the Liberal Party.
Mm.
And Philip, I think a lot of people, you know, they just want their voice heard. It's not even about whether it's a Liberal seat or a Labor seat. It's about the community wanting to be heard. And I think that's the other big thing here. And that's what, as an independent, that's my goal, to make sure that my community is continually heard through the 3 years after I'm elected, thinking in the positive.
Fantastic. Yeah. And Julianne, would you share a paragraph from your book with us, please?
Yeah, was that the one you'd like me to read about the young people?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, that would be fine.
We may have pre-organised this.
Just so I know which page to turn to. Just for a little bit of context, I was involved with the 2020 summit that was held in Parliament House in 2008. I was one of the co-chairs of the Creative Australia stream. I used to joke that I was Kate Blanchett's understudy, which was as near as I'd ever got to stepping into her very large shoes. But it was a great experience and I was very honoured to be involved. Anyway, so this comes from that experience. Listening to a group of brilliant young people, men and women, a generation younger than me, at the 2020 summit in Parliament House in 2008, brought me up with the start. They said they were almost embarrassed to be Australian. They felt no affinity with the Crocodile Dundee, throw a shrimp on the barbie, where the bloody hell are you version of the country. The idea of Australia they saw being projected did not reflect the diversity they knew or the stories they wanted to hear and tell. The history wars had raged during their schooling, with officially sanctioned attacks on the historians who revealed darker tales. These brilliant young people felt Australia's reluctance to face the past meant that the nation was going nowhere. They preferred to think of themselves as citizens of the world, ready to detach and make their lives elsewhere. This was before banking fraud triggered the global financial crisis, before Trump, before Brexit, and before professionalised politics spun the new revolving door so fast that it spat out 5 Australian prime ministers in a decade. So that, in a way, I was trying to touch on how the changes in terms of the idea of Australia really work across generations, and how where we are now in trying to think about this is up against not only the sort of undermining of what it means to be Australian that's been done politically and economically, but also the impact of globalisation in saying that people can be just attached, that be anywhere at any time, which is sort of true but not true as well.
Yeah. It really struck me when I was reading that I felt like you've just paralleled like my life trajectory over the last 20 years, and like getting to this point and going, well, we've spoke off camera about divisive nationalism, and that to me is a lack of faith in nationalism. And then what I'm seeing in the independent movement is this almost like the flooding in New South Wales and things. I've got live streams of friends who are talking about how engaged they feel by being in community, going through a disaster and supporting each other. And then the climate change movement and people standing up to say enough is enough. To me, well, I guess my question is, what does innovative and inclusive nationalism look like? Is that the wave you're all riding? And this question is open to the floor.
Can I just chuck in something to start it off in a way? I mean, I think that one of the things, I mean, for all the hardships that people have endured over the last couple of years of COVID, one of the real strengths has been that people have been forced to think locally. That whereas once we sort of drove fast, from one part of the town to the other, all of a sudden you had to engage locally. And there are a lot of things which are moving in that direction which don't fit into the narratives of the big parties. So I think that there are a lot of sort of global factors in a way which make it possible for us to hear the stories, listen to the concerns of what's happened in a sort of neighbourhood that doesn't translate onto the national stage.
I'm going to add one little bit more context on that too, working in responsible investing and live streaming to people and having our conferences and online and all these types of things. When we were trying to really bring purpose into investment, because there's so much money out there, it's just really hard to invest it well in Australia because our economy is so last century. So here we all are on Zoom, and we've got kids jumping on our laps and dogs and jump. It just basically what it did for me, that whole COVID experience, is it showed me that these people working in investment are just people doing what they can. And it made it okay to care. And I think that's what I've seen in the last few years. While before it was the fact that I'd worked at the Australian Conservation Foundation and at the Climate Institute might have made me, oh my gosh, left wing. But actually, no, it's actually the very core of, in some ways, conservatism in a way, being a liberal, is the fact that you care about and you're a custodian of country. So I found a great confidence that I think COVID kind of gave me as a citizen that I could bring to work, and that blending between being a worker and being a citizen happened. And that's probably some of the base, I think, in the conversation we may be having about what this new sort of nationalism is about. I think it's fertile in that soil. You're getting rid of your cat or child, your fur child, Philip. Yeah.
Sorry about that. He's taking control of the mouse.
Yeah. Exhibit A.
See, I would argue that, though, Nicolette, that the last couple of years have represented an opportunity lost in that regard, because we went through an unprecedented time of great strain and anxiety. And I can hear my puppy scrabbling at the door behind me. I hope you can't. And our state and federal governments turned on each other. And so we could have had a time where there was bipartisanship, which would have brought us together and would have made things much easier for everybody. But the federal government showed a massive dearth of leadership during that period, which became really, really problematic. Working in a public hospital system, we felt abandoned. We could see that there were failures of vaccine rollout, and we could see the potential sequelae of that coming towards us, like a tsunami, which is pretty much what hit us in Victoria at the end of last year with Omicron. But even before then with Delta, you could see it happening. But the vacuum at the top meant that there was no one to talk to, and we really felt that there was no one at the wheel.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, I would love to get all of those people into PPE for 8 hours just for one shift to know what it's like, or, you know, to leave them in an aged care facility for a couple of days where they can't be visited. You know, all of that stuff, we've been let down to an extent that we just wouldn't have expected possible from our own government. And that is one of the things that I think has brought the community together.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the other thing which is really striking about this is that, you know, this has been a crisis. You know, this has been an enormous crisis, you know, and for any nation or any polity to squander a crisis of this scale while sloshing so much money around as they did, but not to actually take the big steps, the big structural steps that need to be taken to underpin what the future might be like. I mean, that is a dereliction of responsibility that goes, I mean, it's up close and personal for those of you who work in the medical system, but it goes in every direction at the same time. And I just think that it's a tragedy that will pay back, you know, over a long period, and that's why, you know, part of the reason why the independence thing is so important. But the lack of leadership and the lack of imagination in terms of thinking about what the future might be and how you use this inflection point, I mean, they didn't do it. It's terrible.
Oh, sorry.
I think also, you know, being mayor, I found that our community, you know, didn't have that voice. We didn't have a voice to the state government. We didn't have a voice to the federal government. And no matter who I sat down with, I couldn't get anyone to understand that in our space we needed to be heard. And, you know, even, you know, how were different things going to affect us, whether it was the vaccine rollout and having people having to travel over 30 to 50 kilometres to get to a vaccination hub in the early days. You know, that was a huge impact. Our public transport is terrible down here. People could take an hour and a half to get to a vaccination hub, or longer to get to those places. You know, no one checked in with us, and we had the Minister for Health here. So it just makes it so much harder. And I think, you know, the community did rally around each other. The community is speaking to each other. They've got solutions to problems, but they can't be heard. And, you know, for lots of people in my community, that was really difficult, and it was a hard pill to swallow, you know, so to speak. It was difficult for all of them.
Sorry, Philip, I was going to say that heartbreaking and absolutely not just frustrating, it makes me angry when I hear about that, and particularly the impact on our seniors and aged care. It is exactly the same leadership void that's happened in climate as well, which is just not turning up, not having a plan, someone else's responsibility. And so I just think it's symptomatic of a lack of ability to plan and have leadership. I'm seeing it across a number of things in our economy and our system around care. It's why I'm running, because it gobsmacks me when I have to go, really? The last thing, bingo warning, when the Prime Minister this week was talking about the floods in Lismore, he used the term, when he was blaming the New South Wales government that it was their responsibility, he said urban water management is the responsibility of the states. And it just shows me that this particular Prime Minister has no concept of physical climate impacts, and the fact that floods are, you know, calling them an urban water issue is just, you know, there we go.
But the other thing, Nicolette, about that is that in many of these areas, there have been reports and studies and recommendations made time and time and time again. I mean, but the capacity to even understand that report, to understand the recommendations, let alone taking the logical steps of implementing them. I mean, it's one of the fatal flaws, in a sense, of this society over quite a long period, that we have endless inquiries and nothing gets done. I mean, in the book I talk about it as the COVID X-ray, and the COVID X-ray showed the good and the bad, and you know, like any diagnostic tool, it's a time to actually learn from that and apply the lessons. I mean, step one, you know, look at those recommendations. I mean, the disaster management recommendations made in 2011, you know, would have, had they been implemented, would have offset a lot of the terrible stuff that happened in my part of the world.
Or help people recover better.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the community was calling for, you know, to build back better. They were calling for that down here in my community, and it wasn't happening on the ground. You know, there's been no, okay, this is what's happened. And we do have also, Nicolette, a really high number of people in the, you know, above 65 who are in aged care. We have heaps of aged care homes down here. And so we had this opportunity for a moment, and maybe we still do, maybe it's still there, where we can, Julianne, plan for something that could be so much better. I think it's still there.
It's interesting, Julianne, you started by saying, speaking of the young people, saying that they don't recognise the Australia represented by the slogan, "Where the bloody hell are you?" And of course, we all know who was head of Tourism Australia when it came up with that slogan, don't we?
Yeah. Yes, we do.
For the bingo purposes, Nicolette, you actually have to say his name as well. I just get away with it. You would have had to say.
If you
Scott
say his
Morrison.
name, he may appear in the room. Isn't that how it works? Oh, no, that's the other one. Sorry.
I mean, you guys want to get elected locally, and then you need to lead the country nationally. You're speaking to people in your electorate. They're saying, you know, when I ran for Melbourne City Council, actually in the middle of COVID, I cared for my father through palliative care while he died, at the same time as running for election in the Melbourne City Council and having a funeral with 10 people at it. So went through that whole thing, and it was shitty. It was really not good. Whilst having a very good friend who's a head of surgery in Portland in Oregon. So speaking pretty closely about the hospital pressures of dealing with flux and medical systems and things. And yeah, that was a time. So onwards. I was just wondering, when you're speaking to so the thing I was thinking there is, people were coming at me when I was going for council election saying, look, we need a dog park. We need this, very specific things to get their vote. And I was just getting email floods from people who were signing me up to basically blanket messaging systems. So you guys are responding to your community, and then you're getting up to lead national policy on things like bushfire, flood, and building a new submarine base. How do you sit with that tension? Like when you get, you know, you win the ticket and then you're in the hot seat.
For me, Philip, I think it's about collaboration. You know, you can't work in a silo at a federal level and not think that you shouldn't be interacting with state or local government, because at the end of the day, you know, even as mayor, I was working across all three levels. You've got to talk to people. You've got to collaborate to get somewhere. And I think that if I win this seat at a federal level, I get that opportunity to collaborate with my state and local government colleagues. And I think that that's really important. I don't, you know, there are so many local issues that will, are definitely being hit federally. For example, climate action. You know, I've got communities down here who want to generate their own power, and the only thing holding them back is political will. That's it. That's the only thing holding them back. You know, I've spoken to coal miners who want to see a transition plan because they want certainty for jobs. It's simple things. It's not, these things aren't big, but they need that voice at the table.
Yeah, I had a little go at 100-day plan, and then I did my first term, my second term. Don't know if I'm going to go third, but the really great news is that there's a fair bit of shovel-ready policy that's there. The member for Indi's sorted us out with a federal ICAC. First go, in it goes, as far as I'm concerned. The member for Warringah has also got a great climate action bills. In they go. There's plus and plus. So I would like to, I've got a few things like electoral funding reform. Wouldn't that be great? And sort of restore integrity to our democracy and lift some standards. But there's also, I think, mentioned before, Monique, that, oh no, it was Julianne, there's so many things like the Aged Care Royal Commission, like just implement that, thank you. The Jenkins Review to get women, you know, feeling safe and respected in Parliament and in other workplaces. There are plenty of these things that have spent countless days, hours, you know, weeks, months of experts and people sharing their stories that have gone into these reviews and royal commissions that now just really can be implemented. One of my favourite ones, this is probably not everybody's favourite, is the Henry Tax Review, which almost nothing's been done. I'm really excited about the fact that we have the largest deficit ever, and we have it's horrible. I mean, but it can it get worse? I hope not. So the great opportunities that can be afforded to this nation's economy by gearing it up for a 21st century just can't be squandered any longer. So I really think we should be taxing the bad things or putting a price on carbon. Did I get that one out? Not a carbon tax though, of course. We want industry to do that. But we also need to not tax things that make a lot of sense. In New South Wales, for example, I mean, to Despi's point about the federated system, we have a whole lot of inefficiencies there, and we have payroll tax. We put a tax on small business employing people. It doesn't make sense. So it's a whole systemic look at how we raise money as a government and how we spend money as a government. And the three things I want to take is fairness, sustainability, and productivity. And I want to have a look at our whole tax system and our economy and use those principles to drive some thinking to put us into the 21st century.
Nicolette,
like an election pitch. Sorry about that. I got
Nicolette, even your comment there on payroll tax, the Mornington Peninsula, French Island, are in a position where we're considered metro under the state planning scheme, and our small businesses pay payroll tax accordingly, even though these businesses really are in a tourist regional area. I mean, why can't people just, why can't the system look at the individual groups rather than blanket the whole area? And we have farms, we have agriculture, horticulture, as well as tech businesses. We have a new battery going in down here. And renewables. It's so vast, and yet it's just blanketed with one rule. It just doesn't make any sense.
Look, can I put in something else at this point in terms of the agenda? And I think I absolutely share the urgency of the issues that you've all been raising. From my point of view, I would really like to see more attention being paid to the Uluru Statement and a structural resolution, meaningfully structural resolution of the First Nations settlement with the nation. I think that until we do that as a nation, we will always have a festering sore of our own making. Jeremy Bentham, the scholar in 1803, said that the failure to create a treaty at the point of British first settlement was an incurable flaw. Now, I'd like to think it's not incurable, but here we are in 2022. And I noticed that on the list of issues that are being raised, in some cases, Uluru is being raised as an issue, but it seems to me that it's a foundational issue that really needs to be given great weight, because to remake the society in the way that you are all seeking in different ways, fixing that wrong really has to be done.
I'd agree, Julianne, but I guess probably many of us probably do agree with you. And the reason why we haven't put it up first and foremost is that none of us will be able to affect any of the changes we want to affect if we can't get elected. And what will determine whether or not people vote for us will not be that one issue. So in my electorate, the single thing that people are most concerned about is, probably 50-50 is climate change or the economy. And people who are concerned about climate change might well vote for me, but the economy maybe not so, because I'm up against someone who has demonstrable expertise in management of that issue and whether or not it's true. And of course, I don't think it is true. there is a public perception that the Liberal Party is the most responsible economic managers in this country, which, you know, they've managed to, I can't think of the word, but that, you know, everyone seems to think that. I really can't understand why. But
because their business is business. Yeah.
So, you know, so I agree with you. So for me, the Uluru Statement of the Heart and the voice of the Constitution, all that sort of stuff is kind of a given, but it's a secondary issue only because it's not one of the things that will help me convince people to vote for me or not vote for me. And unless I can do that, I can't affect any of these changes that I'm really keen to be involved with.
I find it, I mean, I'm going way off piste here, but I have, in our electorate, we have 30% Chinese Australians, and it is extremely difficult to have a conversation with this emerging section of my community without having a conversation about our relationship as colonisers of this country. And I think what is a real block in having a sophisticated and grown-up conversation about China is the fact that we have not reconciled the fact that we invaded this country. So in that respect, apart from the fact it's the right thing to do, and having Dutch heritage, we are some of the worst colonisers in the world. And I have personally quite deep shame about this. It's up to everybody how they have their relationship with it. But I think it's a really fundamental thing. I know that I'm not an Indigenous woman. And I do know that as a non-Indigenous woman, we probably do need to start having some very serious conversations as non-Indigenous people about what that kind of reconciliation and healing looks like for us, and get out of the way of Indigenous Australians to do that as well. It's extremely complex. I don't have any of the solutions. I just have lots and lots of questions. But I certainly, you know, not only once elected, not even if I don't get elected, this is a complete personal journey and one that I want to take into workplaces, into families, everything. I think it's absolutely essential that we have a common story of who we are so that we can proudly and honestly move forward into the century with a common story of who we are. That's really important.
I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, the Uluru process was itself a bit like your local campaigns. You know, it was a deeply consultative, you know, engagement with people about what the issues were. So that was the precursor of it. And, you know, if you take the truth-telling element, and I mean, the structural constitutional change is obviously the most important, but the truth-telling stuff is interesting because that will also be very local. You know, that will be the stories of, you know, in Bradfield and in the Mornington Peninsula. I mean, there will be stories which are specific to place and people, and it will start with the First Nation stories, but it will then build the layers of other stories of settlement. And so, I mean, it seems to me that I actually hear what you're saying, Monique, but it seems to me that it's of a piece in very much in the sort of, you know, in the sort of intellectual and activist movement that you guys are all working in. This is part of the same sort of movement in a way.
Julianne, I have actually the Uluru Statement of the Heart on my equality pillar because I think that's really important. And I know from the stories I'm told from the elders down here that, you know, this area was a really important place. And there are stories about the bay and, you know, look, and so much of it was lost due to colonisation and due to, you know, what the colonisers did as they moved through this area. And the Bunurong people lost family, they lost language, they lost culture. And, you know, although there's a real strive to bring that back into this space, there's just so many issues. And I'm actually really pleased that the Victorian government have actually seen to actually start the treaty and the treaty and the truth telling already. And the whole country is watching our process down here. And I've supported people down here as mayor and feel like it's an important part to do with climate action as well, because the country, you know, country doesn't belong to us. We should be looking after it, nurturing it, like First Nations people have done for many thousands of years. They rely on it. And I think we've got a lot to learn. And I think part of that treaty truth-telling will actually help us understand how important country is and where we see our place in it. But it's got to be that shared future, but we're not going to get there without those other steps in place and the self-determination of First Nations people.
Well said, everyone. Thank you. To quote Julianne again, in relation to democracy being broken, institutions created to make a democratic system robust, accountable, and ethical could no longer be relied upon. It may just be sledging the same point here, though I was wondering for people's thoughts on that.
Well, you always need systems of checks and balances, don't you? And one of the things we have with the current government is a tendency to make announcements about things that are going to happen, but really no follow-up as to whether or not they have happened, and then no assessment of the success of that intervention, assuming that it has happened. Very often it hasn't. And very little transparency about the decision-making process. So I think that's what we need. I mean, I think most people agree that we need an independent commission against corruption to look at many aspects of the government's current functioning, and that we need to have that prospectively, looking at all of the major pieces of legislation that the federal government passes.
I was going to say it probably even goes a bit broader. So particularly in my electorate and personally, there's these institutions that are very important around the concept of trust that we need to have in our society between institutions and the people. Things like the ABC, the SBS, the Australian Human Rights Commission, the Administrative Review Tribunal, all these that need to have public criteria for the selection of people on those boards. And the processes by which they are appointed must also be made public. That's particularly the pressure on the ABC as an example in its freedom to report what it needs to report is not healthy for the future of a robust democracy. So those types of things really need to be looked at as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a very, very concerted effort over several decades to really say that the business of government can be done by business, and some of it can, but some of it is different. The process of public administration, the role of institutions. I mean, institutions are there to provide the glue in the sort of the way we run our democratic lives, and if they're weakened deliberately, that is a real danger for the whole society. If they're weakened by their own inadequacy, as we've seen, for instance, with the Catholic Church and the other churches that have been implicated in the abuse scandals over the years, that means that they've got to look at their own operations. That's a weakening from within, but it's the weakening from deliberate weakening and undermining, in the name of politics, that's most damaging, because it undermines then trust and confidence, makes people think that there's nothing that they can do to make a difference. And in fact, they can, and if those institutions are robust, they will be supported in that way.
Yeah.
I think too, sorry, Nicolette.
No, you go ahead, Despi. I was getting all excited about talking about something else.
I was actually just going to touch on just the institutions. It's actually up to our institutions, and even as mayor at a local government level, it was my role to ensure deliberative democracy in my area. It's the role of institutions to make sure that happens, that people are given a voice, and if you don't invite people to the table or go out and seek them, they don't have a voice. It has to be deliberative. It can't just be, we've talked to a couple of people, or we asked people to comment, but they didn't. People are busy. They've got busy lives. There's a lot going on for people right now, especially now. And so we actually need to go out there and find out what they need, what the issues are for them. So it is about deliberative democracy, not just democracy on its own.
I was going to just add in there that I was quite heartened to see that this time around the Australian Electoral Commission has taken to social media, is actually having a personality and engaging with people, and it has its own sort of page to myth bust things, that mistruths that get slayed around, and there are plenty of them, can I say. And there's even a little schematic that I saw a tile yesterday, I think it was, which is what the AEC does and what it doesn't do. And a call to action to voters to have a look at whether the candidate that's nominated has an endorsement from the party. If they don't, then do your research, because then you don't know where they come from. This is great. I mean, having said that, my son's 19. He's voting for the first time in a federal election. And he has told me, it's quite frightening, and some sort of early polling's had a look at this too, but there is a lot of influence on young voters who, for all reasons, you just look at the federal parliament now, no wonder they're disengaged, because it's just not a really good, you don't look at that place of the highest, supposed to be the highest integrity of the nation, right? And I mean, you know, place office of the nation and think, wow, I really want to go into parliament because these people are great leaders. It's not what we're seeing right now. And he was basically talking about a lot of his people that he knows thinks that, you know, voting for the UAP is quite good, because, you know, why wouldn't you stuff the government, stuff the parties and what have you? And these are really educated, in kind of engaged young people. So what I'm backing you up there, Julianne, that we have a long way to building the trust back and getting people invigorated again. I'm so heartened through the Voices movement from my electorate, just how many people in my electorate I've met in this process. And I think I'm going to have friends for life that I didn't even know, and I've lived here most of my life. So it's starting again, but we can't leave people behind. We can't leave our Chinese Australian friends. We cannot leave the first-time voters. These are all part of our future democracy, and they all need to be brought into the conversation about what we want to create together, and don't leave people behind.
I think your point about trust is so right. You know, I don't know, I guess everyone's seen the various UAP posters, you know, the huge big yellow billboards, but where I've seen the most is driving between Sydney and Byron. And so you drive through those areas of New South Wales, of sort of the coastal areas of New South Wales, which are struggling. You know, people, you know, these are not rich places. People are really, you know, they're eking out livings. You know, it's a tough place, a beautiful country. And I look at these signs and they say, you can trust no one. You can't trust the Greens, you can't trust Labor, you can't trust the Libs, you can't trust the Nationals. No one can be trusted. And it's like the image that kept on coming to my mind, that it was like somebody flicking a match into the dry grass. You know, it was like the behaviour of an arsonist, you know, trying to destroy the fabric of these communities. I mean, you cannot say, you know, it's just wrong. And to encourage people to think that all the political parties are completely without merit is, you know, it's irresponsible in the extreme when you are trying to get yourself elected. I mean, it's an arsonist approach to politics. It's terrible.
There's a crew from New Zealand, a communications agency that got behind Scott Morrison's campaign and then went off and did the Brexit campaign. And I've got a long dossier on digital targeted advertising and out expenditure. And one of my questions, Nicolette, was so what are the friends of your 19-year-old going to do? And you answered that for me in a rather upsetting kind of fashion. So that's now I do want to respect everybody's time and what I said we were going to do. Now, but just before we get to the sort of the final question, I wanted to play a fast money round with you. And Monique, you've been a contestant on Sale of the Century, I believe. So you'll know all about this. How did you?
Oh no, that's not fair.
When you're on Sale of the Century,
it predated even my Labor Party membership.
All right, awesome. So anyway, I'm going to say a word, and you will say the first thing that pops into your head. It can be a sentence if you want, but just so we all need our mics on, and I'm just going to go for it. So, truth in advertising laws.
Good.
Has to happen. It's part of integrity.
Andrea?
Great. So we got our order. Monique, then Despi, then Nicolette, then Julianne. Next one, the Greens. One word. First thing that pops into your brain.
Insufficiently pragmatic.
That was 2 words.
Not good on the maths.
Or a sentence. Come on, we can do this. Going to skip that one.
Needing collaboration.
Okay.
Passionate.
I'd say important.
COVID-19.
Still with us.
Your face says.
Yeah. It's not, it hasn't gone away. It's not going to go away. I think the next mini outbreak will happen around the time of the election, unfortunately.
I think it's already started, Monique. It seems to be numbers are going back up again. That's concerning.
Unfortunately, I think, you know, it's going to be an endemic disease. It's going to cause significant problems for us for years to come.
There are opportunities though, aren't there? Are there? I'm hoping there's opportunities. I'm trying to be optimistic.
Oh no, it's manageable. It's just that, you know, you have to plan for these things in the same way that, you know, you plan for anything else in a big economy. And I lack any confidence that there is a plan at this point for the next outbreak.
Maybe that's the role of the next sitting parliament, to have that plan.
I've got a whole question about governments and plans. So, Monique, Nicolette, your take on COVID-19?
Mental health pandemic, epidemic. I'm not sufficient. Monique, you're a professor in medicine. That word that goes all the way through in a long time.
Yeah. Systemic mental health challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it is systemic. It is systemic, Philip, because it's being, you know, mental health. The idea about fixing it can't be, it's not a one thing. And communities need to be engaged in, you know, how they support that area of our health.
Yeah, I actually pitched the Prime Minister's office 3 months ago a national youth mental health intervention using a program called Stronger Brains, with the guy who invented the cochlear implant, which is a fascinating thing, but they're building submarine bases. So, but I digress. Those two they don't stack as an argument. I retract that. Budget surplus. Still playing fast money.
Mental health, education, transport, back to the people. And climate action, climate plan. Sorry, that plan word's coming up again, isn't it?
Oh, now I'm confused because Despi, you've just changed the order.
Sorry.
I meant to reverse.
I just jumped in.
Anyway.
I was going to say cherry picking numbers.
Yeah.
What surplus are you talking about? We've got like no productivity, no wage growth, housing affordability is just out of this world. We can't compete internationally because our economy is stuck in the last century. Like, don't get me started. Yeah. Budget surplus is going to be smoke and mirrors and probably just lies.
Thanks.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. That's why I'm doing this.
I'd say accounting tricks.
Is someone suggesting we're going to have a budget surplus?
I know.
It's going to be $97 million, $1 billion in deficit.
On ski reform.
But yeah, but it's interesting because I read that Richard Dennis paper recently where he just said, why are we so stressed about the budget deficit? All the other major economies aren't. It's something that we all led to believe that we have to work towards it, and that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But really, it's not the primary concern. We have services to provide.
It supports the narrative that the Liberals are the good ones for good financial managers, which isn't actually backed up by the data of the last 30 years. As far as I've been able to tell. But
it's also a confusion, as Richard says, it's a confusion of the household, managing your household accounts with managing government accounts, the surplus and a benefit, the surplus and deficit and so on, you think about it in domestic household terms, it's different to how governments work. And the example that I use is that in 1835, the British government borrowed more money than had ever been imagined to be borrowed to pay back the people who were the owners of slaves. It wasn't to pay the slaves, but to pay back the people who owned slaves and who had shares in companies. The money that was borrowed by the British government to do that basically drove the Industrial Revolution for the next 50 or 100 years. They finished paying back that debt 2 years ago. Governments can actually handle debt for a very long term if they want to, and it can have, consequences which may be on balance positive.
Well, perhaps that's part of the smoke and mirrors, Julianne. Maybe that's, the way they do sell it to ordinary Australians as a household budget.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets problematic.
But I would say that, sorry, I can't help myself again, but with the inaction on climate is a classic, let's push the problem down to future generations. And the same thing I'm looking with the debt. I don't think a government's job is to be run like a business. It has to do healthcare, it has to do education, it has to do communications, all those things that are essential services for a dignified human existence. And it also doing it well and it cost effectively lets all the boats float above, all the small and medium enterprises, all the other businesses that benefit from a fast, reliable internet service, or healthcare when their family or their workers or whatever need to have timely, and affordable and inclusive services in health. But sorry, where I was going with that is
but Nicolette, the other thing I would add into that, and you mentioned this before, and that is that what this country needs is an economy which is much more sophisticated than the one that we've currently got. I mean, we get these lines all the time that government doesn't pick winners. I mean, government does effectively pick winners by the industries it chooses to support. And in that case, in this country, it's essentially mining, banking, a bit of media, and then services, picking up the mops, and a bit of agriculture as well.
And our third largest export in tertiary education, we decide to throw it to the wall.
We could trash it. So to build a sophisticated, an economy which is sophisticated and reflects the degree of education and capacity and resources that are available here, actually takes some serious thought. And that serious thought just hasn't been put on the table for such a long time, and now the economy looks about as sophisticated as it did in a colonial society.
And it takes also, Julianne, common sense. And I think I'd say that the people on this call here, and probably the people listening in, have that in spades. It's not, whilst everything's complex, asking the questions to get the answers is not that hard. We know what we have to do. We're watching, particularly on the low carbon bit, we know what other countries are doing. All our superannuation money right now is not going into Australia. It's going into the componentry that's making electric vehicles and all of those things in other countries, not that we will eventually buy back over here, paying excise tax and tariffs and what have you. It's just not smart. It's taking jobs away from my children.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I'm going to skip over my question about ministers having domain expertise, and are the people in control do they need to have domain expertise in the interest of time? And the other things for that fast money round were coal seam gas, private school funding, national broadband network, circular economy, carbon tax, ICAC, and Scott Morrison. But we'll just take those as done. And Julianne, in the registration for this event, I included some why questions from your book, the end of which was the potentiality for Australia to become more than a half-formed idea. And you were just loosely talking to this. What does a fully formed idea of Australia look like to you?
Well, it would look like a place where that foundational flaw was addressed, so where there was a structural place for First Nations people and a proper pathway going forward. That would be step one. Step two would be about trying to reset an independent frame of mind. And so that means engaging with the world on our terms rather than on the terms of those that we felt we needed to be protected by. It would be a place in which fear is not used to make people, to diminish people. So it would be inclusive, outward looking, And it primarily, essentially, it would be a place where inequality is addressed fundamentally, because people aren't going to be able to engage in these big sort of discussions that, you know, we can talk about in this sort of forum if they're worried about where their next meal is coming from. So that the question of addressing inequality, structural inequality, educational inequality, and all the related elements, that needs to be put centre stage. When Bob Hawke years ago said, in a bit of a misstatement, that no child would be living in poverty by the next election 3 years hence, he got taken down. You know, making an overstated claim. This would be impossible. He shouldn't have said it. And you know, there was argy-bargy around the politics. The fact was that over that 3-year period, the level of childhood poverty went through the floor. That real steps were taken that actually addressed that question. So if we make it a priority, those things can be done. And I think that this country is absolutely smart enough and able enough to do that if we're prepared to be a bit bold.
Yeah, wonderful. And to our independents, I put it to you publicly a few days ago what your vision for Australia 50 years from now would look like. Could each of you take us through it?
I don't remember that bit of homework, Philip, did I? 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. Excuse me if my brain is forgotten.
Well, what do you think? What's your vision for Australia? I mean, really, it's like it's an inverse statement about all the problems we currently see, I dare say. So,
what's the time frame? Sorry, 50-50?
50 years from now.
50 years. Oh, from now, 2070.
Yeah, what does Australia look like if everybody gets going in the right direction and we address these fundamental problems we have? Oh, we don't all burn alive. What are we?
I'll go. I'll have a go, Philip. To me, it's local and global. I'd like to see, more that it's more community orientated in our local areas, but with a global outreach. So that probably sounds a little bit, high, and and perhaps empathy. I want to see empathy, and it goes back to what Julianne was saying. We need to look after our vulnerable people and make sure there is food on the table, make sure they have a roof over their head. The amount of homelessness in Flinders, it blows your mind when we're also in the place where there are some of the richest people, Portsea, Sorrento. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for a lot of people in my community. We want to see, everybody supported. And if we can support and allow everyone to be their best selves, and that's actually going to mean going back upstream rather than treating downstream and thinking that we just have to catch everybody in the net as they start to fall through. I don't think that's good enough. I'd prefer it to be an upstream approach where we're actually supporting people to be their best selves. Domestic violence is also through the roof here. Gender equity needs a lot of work. We, right across all genders, it needs to be something that we're really thinking about. And I think that comes back to empathy as well. And, my nan used to say to me, you need to walk in that person's shoes. And I still remember that. That I don't know where and why she said that to me. There's probably lots of reasons, but as a young person, that sat with me quite a lot growing up. And I think that if we can think about what it is like for other people to live, to have those hard times, it might actually make us think more about where we could go, what we could do, what the possibilities are.
Okay, I might be ready now. Because Monique paused.
I warmed you up, Nicolette.
Thank you. No, you're absolutely spot on. And I know it's tricky to talk about the local, global part, but yes. So all the businesses listed on the stock market, if there still is one, is going to be a B Corp, so have some public purpose embedded in its constitution, because making profit just for shareholders is just not going to work in the long term. We might have even remutualized finance. There's something a bit interesting. And we got rid of GDP as a concept. Who needs that? Let's talk about sufficiency or enoughness. Let's have other metrics of celebrating the fact that we're an inclusive and cohesive society where there are outwardly, we understand and recognize people's differences, but we respect them because we've sought to understand those. We have a courageous democracy where we are engaged, that we debate issues in the lower house because that is a successful behaviour. We're not, and because we've had a federal ICAC for like 49 and a half years, we know, we trust our government implicitly because they've been very open with the decisions that they've made. I think with the local, to Despi's point, I'm going to just celebrate that one. I think our energy systems are going to be localized and decentralized. We're going to have a wonderful system of our electric vehicles, which we may or may not own ourselves, but they're part of the system of giving us dispatchable power and energy when we need it. The price of the fuel at the Bowser is, for a full charge, maybe $4, because it's all from solar. And we don't have a national security issue because we don't have to import oil because we've got all of our energy sources right here in Australia, because the sun is free today and it's free tomorrow. I might leave the health and the other parts to Monique though, but you want to just jump on painting that picture, build on this little...
Okay, great. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. So we have universal healthcare and dental care, and we have mental health care, which is free and easily accessible to people of all ages. We have generous paid parental leave schemes and fully funded childcare for children of all ages. And the people who are providing that care, similar to the people in aged care, are paid well, have mature career development throughout their time in that industry, and are valued by the society. And I don't think we recognise the society in which we live because it's cleaner and quieter and greener than anything that any of us have ever experienced.
And at its heart, it has a creative and cultural sort of engagement around public good, and that comes through equal access to quality education, rather than the most segregated education system in the OECD.
Our arts and our cultural community is alive and well, and our first Australians are celebrated. And guess what? They don't die earlier than everybody else. That'd be nice. Not just nice. It should be now.
Yeah, it's a I guess that 2050 Australia from now that Australia is a place where equity isn't questioned, or it's just apparent in all areas of our engagement.
So are you all the ones to make that happen?
Hell yes.
Yeah, we'll kick it off. Yeah,
give it a go.
Great.
I do think that we are on the cusp of a paradigm change in Australian politics, which I hope that will be apparent at the next election. And I plug for the independents. I do think that the independents would be by promoting a less partisan form of politics in the national capital will improve the tenor of political discussion there, and then that will have downstream effects into all aspects of government in this country.
I do want to stick to the plan, and that is I've got a whole bunch of Q&A here from the people who are watching, and I don't know what your timeframes are like in relation to how much you've attributed to this, and I do know you're all on the campaign trail, apart from Julianne and myself, putting in a lot of hours. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for your contributions this evening and for turning up, to all four of you. I really appreciate, Julianne, your insights and it's just a real privilege to be able to share this and spend time with you. And so in an official sense, I'm going to say, well, that's the end, and then flip to Q&A and just go through as many as you guys are happy to take, really. Thank you for joining me for the Smarter Impact Show. My name is Philip Bateman. If you've got a conference or event for your organization and you're looking for an interviewer to come and get the best out of your people, get in touch with me.
I'll happily come along.